So I think that's enough about the preliminaries, and I think it's time to get cracking with the whole FPC system scope and the type of requirements we have in the relevant standards, mainly in the EN 1091, 1092, and 38343 for the welding. And without going too much into detail why and how and where, I'm just going to tell you that according to our experience, if you don't do any corrosion protection like wet painting, I would say that we have around 5% of the relevant requirements found in the EN 1091, which is actually the main standard or the harmonized standard. And then we have the EN 1092 that actually deals with the whole manufacturing process. It has the requirements and guidelines on how to perform mechanical fastening, holing, cutting, welding, and so on. So this one right here has somewhere around 85% of all the requirements. And then this EN ISO 38343, that is the welding quality management system, has about somewhere around 10% of the requirements, all the rest. And if you want to get some kind of idea on what kind of the requirements are in each and every one of these standards, I would say that these requirements are really easy. And if you really know what you're doing, you can achieve conformity with this standard in somewhere around 1 hour. Then we have the EN 1092, and this is the tricky one because it has quite a lot of different requirements involved. And I would say that if you don't do any welding, meeting the requirements of this standard is actually also quite easy. I would say that it would take somewhere around 2 to 3 days for you to achieve the conformity. But if you do welding, it's going to take a somewhat longer time because there are some mandatory requirements for the welder qualifications. You must have a responsible welding coordinator. You must perform welding according to the VPSs or welding procedure specifications. And all of those are going to take time. Not just your time, but in most cases you must involve a third party in the process, and then coordinating everything and getting the third party involved is going to take a lot of time. But still, if you know what you're doing, it can be done quite fast. Then we have the third place. I have just included this EN ISO 38343 here, just to elaborate it, that you must have a welding quality management system in place if you do welding, even though it's not that big part of the whole CE marking project. The reason behind that is that we have already covered most of the welding related requirements here in the EN 1092. Like that the welders must be qualified and welding must be performed according to the VPSs and so on. So the extra requirements that come from this standard comprise roughly around 10% of all the requirements that are related to the CE marking. But then, of course, if you do welding or corrosion protection, or even if you do measures on tolerances, there are some reference standards that must be followed. But I would say that unless you do corrosion protection with wet painting, hot dip galvanizing, you don't really have to consider the reference standards, as they are elaborating these things, but they are not really that much important things that the notified bodies are going to check. I would suggest, kind of like under the table suggestion, is that in your CE marking project you achieve conformity with these standards and with these reference standards if you do corrosion protection. But in the first phase you just achieve conformity with these standards, and then you get the CE marking certificate, or to be more precise, you get the certificate for your FPC system that has been built according to the requirements of EN 1091. And then after you have been certified, you start to go over these reference standards and kind of like see what is said in them, and if there is something important or something that relates to your activities, and then you include them. But I would say that in most cases, especially if you are a small or micro company, is sufficient if you just achieve conformity with these key standards right here, and then get the welding related standards like welding related requirements like BPSs or responsible welding coordinator or welders qualifications from outside, so you don't actually have to read them yourself. But next I would like to just go over the topics that are covered in the EN 1091 and EN 1092, so you get a kind of like an idea of the contents of the standards. Unfortunately, due to the copyright issues, I'm not able to go over the standards in as much detail as I would like to go over them. So I'm just going to have to stay in quite general level of issues here, so we are not breaking any copyrights and we are not going to get sued or anything. But first, I just want to introduce you to the contents of the standards in the topic level. As you may remember from previous lectures, the FPC system is dictated in the standard EN 1091, and in this case with the structural steel products is in the section 6.3. And if you have the standard EN 1091, you can just check the section 6.3, and that is the scope of the FPC system, or the main factory production control system that must be supported then with the EN 1092 and EN ISO 38343. Well, in the standard section 6.3 is the main factory production control system. And it gives you some, or it gives out some requirements that you must control your personnel, equipment used in the manufacturing and also testing and weighing equipment. Then there are some requirements for the structural design process if you do structural design. And naturally, if you don't do any structural design, you can just skip this part. But if you do, you must consider it. Then there are some requirements for the constituent products that are used in the manufacture of structural steel products. Basically, this part just references another standard where there is a list of all the possible constituent products that can be used. Then there are some requirements for the development of the company specification, and basically who does what and how the company specification relates to other things. And then there are some requirements for the handling of non-conforming products. And at last there is the requirement for product evaluation. And this relates to the fact that this structural steel product falls in the group 2+. And if you remember what the requirements for the 2+ were, there is the manufacturer must establish an FPC system and then determine the essential characteristics in a thing called ITT or ITC, initial type testing, and then they must do spot checks during the manufacturing to make sure that the manufactured product meet the requirements of all the standards and also are according to those characteristics that you declare in the CE marking. So this part right here is the product evaluation of spot checks that are related to the AVCP class 2+. It can be thought, this product evaluation can be thought as the final inspection, even though it's not really quite that, but it kind of like makes it much easier if you just think about it as a final inspection that you make, in which you make sure that you have met all the relevant requirements, and usually we just take care of this product evaluation with a checklist. And then we have the standard EN 1092 that deals with the whole manufacturing process. And if we see this whole process right here, you can see it kind of like progresses as the manufacturing would progress. So first we have what listed all the constituent products that can be used, like what kind of structural steel or stainless steel we can use to manufacture structural steel products. Then we have how to handle those products, how to store them, how to identify them. Then we have the requirements for cutting, shaping, holding, cutouts, assembly, and not in the erection side because the CE marking only deals with the manufacturing done in the workshop. So all manufacturing and erection done at the erection site is excluded by definition from the CE marking. So at the erection site you can do whatever you want to. And all these requirements don't concern you there. But I just want to highlight it, that assembly, if you do any trial assemblies at the workshop, they are included in the FPC system and in the scope of the EN1092. Then we have the welding, mechanical fastening, and surface treatment. And here we have kind of like the guidelines for each and every step of the manufacturing, and you must consider all of these in relation to your own activities. Like we saw already in the previous slide, if you don't do, let's say, any cutting, you can just ignore all of those requirements there and just skip over the whole section. And same thing for surface treatment, or if you don't do any welding, you just can skip all the welding related requirements. And here I would already like to mention one thing about these requirements is that not all of these steps are created equal in terms of the quantity of requirements there are. For example, if we take holing, there are only a few requirements that are related to the holing process. And if we compare it to, for example, to the requirements of welding, in welding we have a huge list of different kind of requirements that take money and time and effort to comply with. With the holing requirements we can achieve conformity in, I would say, in one day. But with the welding it always takes a little bit longer because we have to involve a third party in the process. So we have quite a lot of different kind of requirements here that require, in most cases, an outside body.